I know they're not children, but I said something the other day that really kind of stuck with me. And that's when I remembered the Mitchell MM100. You see, I took that thing apart about 10 minutes after I got it. I never spent time trying to figure out how to play a guitar with a humbucker pickup. I just went ahead and ripped all the guts out, put in the P90-ish pickups, and then it's basically been sitting around unused for a while. You know what? I just can't leave baby stuck in a corner. The first issue that I notice is when I'm unwrapping the pickups is that there seems to be an extra wire. You see, humbucking pickups have 2 coils, so they have 4 wires where I'm used to dealing with single coils that only have 2, a hot and a ground. Now I have a hot and a ground and 2 that I need to put together. I do what any self-respecting person would do. I look it up on the internet. And of course, I find some helpful information and some unhelpful information, and then I have to sort out what's what. I figure out which is the hot, which is the ground, and I figure out that I need to take the white and the red wires and solder them together, which could have been obvious because they're already attached. So I put one of the heat shrink sleeves over them, and I decide that I'm going to do this with both pickups before I even put them close to the guitar again. With this particular brand, there are also 2 ground wires per pickup. One is green and the other is braided. I go ahead and put a sleeve over that one as well. And then it's time to go ahead and grab my soldering iron and put those 2 together. And then all I have to do is pull the sleeves over the exposed wires and get my heat gun and then shrink those sleeves down to fit so they'll seal it off properly. I'm using my helping hands for this, which is what that tool is called. I could probably do one or the other, but I like to do both. By using the solder, I know the connection is solid and not likely to come loose. And by using the shielding material, I know it's not going to make a connection and short out somewhere else. I've broken stuff that way before. Wiring it this way is a choice. I could have used those wires to set up a separate circuit on a volume pot somewhere and use it as a coil split device, or I could have used a 5-position switch in order to do wiring that way. I set it up this way because this is the way that my Jackson is wired, and I play that a lot more often than my Ibanez. I rarely play the Ibanez, but when I do, I rarely use position 2 and 4. We're going to skip a bit of the breakdown here. This was the first guitar that I really did any significant work on, and so I've stripped some screws and broken some trim rings and generally dropped solder all over it, so it's in pretty rough shape. But as I break it down again, I'm reminded that there were a lot of mistakes that were made. I put these screws back in using power tools, and so sometimes I missed the original position of the screws, so there are extra holes in the body. You can see some of the blemishes and discolorations from where I did drop solder, which is why I tend to use the plate. But as you pull the pickups out of your guitar, hopefully you won't see these kind of things and have to deal with this. Take your time, and if you can, use hand tools. It seems like every time I get into the use of even this low-powered battery drill thing, I end up breaking something or just abusing something that I really didn't need to. I also put the trim rings on backwards the first time, so hopefully I'm going to be able to correct that this time. So you'll see me go back and forth between using power tools and hand tools here, and a lot of it just depends on whether or not my patience level is where it should be. Now, some of the other additions that I've made to this guitar are swapping out the tune-o-matic bridge as well as the control knobs. It still has the original controls and the original switch in it that came with it when I bought it at a local pawn shop. The pickups that I'm taking out, however, are not factory. These are the P90-ish pickups. They're big single coils, which is why I haven't run into the extra wires for the humbucker pickups yet. They're nice pickups. They're great in my little Les Pauls. I just don't like them in this guitar for some reason. They sound thin. It might be a different brand, or it could be because I didn't wire them correctly. It's really hard to tell. But I did decide to go ahead and put the humbuckers back in. There's the broken trim. Now when I get the back open, you're going to see a few more problems that we had. I installed both pickups at the same time the first time I took this guitar apart and swapped out the pickups. So that meant labeling the wires as they came through the body. So, of course, I used my blue tape because I love my blue tape. This time I'm going to do the front pickup and then I'm going to do the rear pickup. I'll do those separately, and that way I can go ahead and connect them to the switch. Now, this is also the guitar that taught me to label the switches because I always seem to get them backwards whenever I put a pickup in. I won't tell you the reasoning behind me always getting it wrong, but I will tell you that at least my reasoning is consistent. This time, instead of just cutting the wires, I'm going to try to clean up the mess that is the switch by taking the soldering iron and removing the wires that way. Hopefully I won't have as much debris left behind. I'll find out later that it's a lot more difficult to clean it this way. I really don't know what I'm doing here. And that's where I've learned the most important lesson of all about working on guitars. I'm almost always going to have a chance to come back and correct it, and they're really not nearly as precious as I've treated them over the years. So I'm going to put the one in the neck position first because the wire actually runs underneath the pickup that's in the bridge position. So by doing this first, I can go ahead and feed it through and then come back over. If you do the rear pickup first, you're going to have to take the rear pickup out in order to come back and put the neck pickup in. People tell me that this is obvious, but it's obviously not always obvious to the oblivious. And I have been described as blissfully oblivious before. Speaking of which, there has got to be a better way to mount pickups in plastic. And it doesn't matter if I am dealing with trim rings or a pick guard. This seems to be the part of this process that slows me down more than waiting for a soldering iron to heat up. There's something about a pickup, a spring, and a simple screw that seems to just throw me off continually. This week's turmoil came from the fact that these pickups are apparently wax dipped, which means there was wax over the hole where the screw needs to go in. This seemed to create quite a conundrum for me, as it made it very difficult for me to get the screw to seat in the base of the pickup. I did everything from clearing it with a knife to even thinking about taking a lighter to it at one point, none of which is really helpful. What I did eventually settle on is using the screw itself in order to break the wax free, then taking it back out. But I'm going to leave this in here just for the comedic value. I wish I had that yakety sax thing going on. The whole process of getting the screw in the pickup frame literally took me almost 6 minutes. If you know a better way, please let me know. Once the pickup is permanently installed, you run the wires through and, of course, connect the hot to the switch. Try to be as precise and clean about this as you can. My favorite tool, the automatic wire strippers. These things have saved me so much time and effort, it's not even funny. My second favorite tool is the pair of helping hands that I'm going to grab in a minute. Put the sleeve over the raw wire. Then you connect the two wires together using your helping hands. It's important to take your time when you do this and get it into the best position as possible. The soldering only takes a couple of seconds, and you can be sloppy, but when your connections are clean up front, it really makes much less of a mess if you don't have a delicate hand. And I don't. Given the number of pickups I've installed, it's shocking that I'm still not better at it. Now, this is the last time I try to use the plate. As you notice, it's not here. See, you have to set the helping hands up, and that's frustrating. And then getting the plate in there, well, I was going to need another set of helping hands to use the plate. It just seemed like it would be a better idea to just get better at soldering. Now, of course, I don't necessarily do it this time. That connection is really kind of wonky and really pretty ugly. So the sleeve is really difficult to get back over the connection. And then I basically shrink wrap it. Now, I cannot emphasize this enough. It's always good to check your connections because otherwise you might keep a mistake that you made. Something simple like wiring the switch in backwards, but at least I know how to correct it and it's an easy fix. You just get your hot lead loose with your soldering iron, put it in the slot on the other side of the switch, and then secure it. Once again, being thankful that you decided to install one pickup at a time instead of trying to do them both. Now, I cannot emphasize this enough. It's always important to check your connections. Now, one thing that I only recently started doing is using wire ties to secure these wires. I used to think it was purely a cosmetic thing, but I've actually found that if you do have a connection that's not entirely secure, or if you have something that's not quite shielded and it may make connection and short out, by securing these wires, it's a lot less likely to happen. It also makes it a lot easier to get the plastic bits that seal these cavities back in place. And that's how to install pickups, even though you don't really know how to do it. As you can see, at least one idiot can do this. Here's some basic information about the guitar as it sits today. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, click, subscribe, do that thing you do.